sweltering summer of 1847, insurance investigator Samuel Hartwell uncovered a mystery that would haunt him for life. Over just 8 months, 17 life insurance claims were filed along the Charleston-Columbia Road, all for healthy men between the ages of 25 and 50. Each supposedly died of sudden heart failure while lodging at roadside inns. What disturbed Hartwell most wasn't only the number of deaths, but the strange details. Every victim carried the same sweet odor on his breath, and oleander petals were mysteriously scattered around their rooms. Local authorities dismissed the cases as natural, blaming the hazards of low-country travel. But Hartwell saw something far darker. His investigation revealed a pattern too precise to be coincidence. Successful businessmen worn from travel arrived at inns where attentive hostesses offered them special remedies. Within hours, the men were dead, and their families, grieving and unsuspecting, collected payouts totaling more than $85,000, a staggering fortune at the time. Behind the facade of Southern hospitality, a meticulous killer had turned tea and kindness into a weapon. This trail of death would eventually lead Hartwell to the 6-mile Wayfarer house and to Lavinia Fisher, whose charm, scripture quoting, and gentle smile concealed the heart of a predator. Charleston, in 1847, stood as one of the South's wealthiest ports. Its cobblestone streets lined with grand mansions, its rivers wrapping the city in beauty that disguised its shadows. Slavery, ruthless competition, and unforgiving social hierarchies. It was a world where appearances mattered more than truth, and women were expected to be ornaments, not threats. The Charleston-Columbia Road was vital for merchants and planters, moving cotton, rice, and tobacco inland, yet it was also notorious isolated pine forests, swamps thick with moss, and inns of dubious reputation. Experienced travelers chose their lodgings carefully, but those less cautious often found themselves at the mercy of charming hosts with deadly intentions. At 34, Hartwell represented the Mutual Assurance Company of Virginia and had built his reputation on solving cases others deemed hopeless. Harvard-educated and relentless in his pursuit of hidden details, he had never failed once in 12 years. Though sudden deaths were common in the South, yellow fever, malaria, and exhaustion often struck travelers, Hartwell noticed what others ignored. These were not random tragedies of climate or disease, but carefully orchestrated murders designed to look like fate. Each of the victims had been in good health when they purchased their insurance policies, usually within 6 months of their sudden deaths. They all traveled alone, with no relatives nearby, to raise suspicions or ask difficult questions. Most telling of all, every policy had been arranged by the same elusive agent, a mysterious woman who seemed to drift in and out of travel routes like a phantom, leaving no trace behind. The 6-mile Wayfarer house stood 6 miles north of Charleston, perched at a strategic bend where the main road curved around Goose Creek before vanishing into dense forest. Built in grand Georgian style with broad piazzas designed to catch the faintest breeze, tall white columns, and floor-to-ceiling windows, the inn looked like the embodiment of refinement and Southern grace. Its location was deliberate, far enough from Charleston to offer relief from the city's clamor and smell, yet close enough to reach quickly in case of need. The setting provided both convenience and secrecy, with heavy woods on 3 sides and Goose Creek Swamp guarding the 4th. Anyone conducting illicit activities here could do so undisturbed. Purchased just 3 years earlier by John and Lavinia Fisher, the property was transformed from a decaying coach stop into one of the most elegant inns on the road to Columbia. Records showed they paid in cash, claiming John had inherited the money from a Savannah uncle. Their lavish investment, Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, suggested either enormous ambition or access to hidden wealth beyond the reach of ordinary innkeepers. Lavinia Fisher was the true star of the establishment. At 26, she possessed a striking beauty that could disarm even the most calculating merchant. Tall and commanding, with auburn hair that glowed like copper in the sun and piercing green eyes that seemed to read a man's soul, she embodied perfection by the rigid standards of the era. Yet her appearance was only part of her weapon. She carried herself with elegance, her voice softened by the lilting cadence of Charleston's elite, and spoke with such warmth that every guest felt uniquely valued. She remembered names, family details, and business dealings long after casual conversations, offering sympathy and encouragement with uncanny precision. Guests left believing they had met not only a gracious hostess, but perhaps the finest listener of their lives. Her husband John, in contrast, was forgettable in appearance and manner, short, stocky, balding, and unremarkable. But his very ordinariness made him useful. He managed the grounds with obsessive care, repaired structures with exceptional skill, and offered neighbors quiet, dependable help. His devotion to Lavinia was near worship, and together they played their roles seamlessly. She dazzled the visitors while he maintained the facade of respectability. The first death that truly drew Hartwell's attention came on February 14th, 1847. Valentine's Day, a detail that would later strike with cruel irony. Cotton merchant Theodore Grayson, fresh from prosperous business in Charleston, arrived at the 6-mile Wayfarer house in high spirits. His carriage was filled with samples and contracts, his future bright. He had no way of knowing that his stop at the elegant inn would mark the beginning of a deadly pattern that Samuel Hartwell was determined to unravel. At 48, Theodore Grayson was a man of sharp mind and sharper instincts, a cotton merchant whose fortune came from mastering both the mechanics of production and the frailties of his rivals. When he arrived at the 6-mile Wayfarer house on the unseasonably warm afternoon of February 14, 1847, witnesses said he looked weary, but in good health. Local magistrate Cornelius Weatherby later filed a meticulous report one Samuel Hartwell would pore over in the months ahead. The day's humidity had drained even the hardiest travelers, and Grayson complained of fatigue from both the journey and the oppressive air. Lavinia Fisher herself welcomed him at the door, a personal touch that set her in apart. Noticing his exhaustion, she insisted on preparing her restorative tea, a concoction she claimed was a treasured family recipe made from flowers grown in her private garden. That evening, 2 other guests, a rice planter named Harrison Calhoun and a tobacco inspector from North Carolina, Wesley Dree, would later testify to her remarkable attentiveness. She hovered over Grayson with gracious concern, her charm and conversation lifting his spirits. The tea, served in rose-painted china, carried a floral sweetness with hints of honey. Grayson praised its taste and seemed revived, entertaining his companions with tales of business expansion and future ventures. But the change in his condition came suddenly. His speech slowed, his pauses grew longer, and the flush of the warm day gave way to a pallid gray. By 9 o'clock, he clutched his chest, complaining of stabbing pain and shortness of breath. Lavinia immediately took command, sending John to fetch Charleston's most respected physician, Dr. Reginald Peaton, while she personally tended to the stricken guest. When Peaton arrived near midnight, he found Grayson in alarming decline, dilated pupils, irregular heartbeat, and a faint almond-like odor that hung in the air. The signs pointed to poisoning, though the specific substance eluded him. Despite all efforts, Grayson slipped away around 2 in the morning, his body eerily still lying as though in peaceful sleep rather than the tortured state most poison victims endured. Even stranger were the pink oleander petals scattered about the floor, though no one could explain how they appeared. Lavinia's calm during the ordeal unsettled Hartwell when he later reviewed the case. While others expected hysteria, she displayed composure, cleaning and arranging Grayson's room before the doctor even arrived. To Weatherby, she offered a simple explanation: the petals must have blown in from her garden. Few questioned the excuse, though February was hardly the season for oleander blossoms in Charleston. The aftermath unfolded with chilling efficiency. Grayson's partner Marcus Redmond filed a claim with Mutual Insurance's Charleston office. The company promptly paid out $5,000. Noting Grayson had been in perfect health when he purchased his policy only 4 months earlier. The policy, like so many others, had been arranged by Laura Ferguson, an Augusta-based insurance agent, whose credentials seemed impeccable. What no one yet realized was that Theodore Grayson's death was not an isolated tragedy, but the first link in a chain of killings that would become one of South Carolina's most methodical and sinister murder campaigns. As the spring of 1847 quickened the Low Country, bringing life back to its fields and markets, so too did the deaths begin to spread along the Charleston Road with a frequency that should have alarmed every authority, but did not. The deaths might have drawn suspicion sooner, but their scattered nature across multiple jurisdictions, combined with the outward respectability of those involved, allowed the pattern to remain hidden from all but the most attentive observers. In March, Tobacco Inspector William Claiborne of the North Carolina Tobacco Commission became the next victim. He had traveled south to investigate irregularities in shipments bound for Europe, but his journey ended at the 6-mile Wayfarer house. Like Theodore Grayson before him, Claiborne arrived weary, was met with Lavinia's hospitality, and soon accepted her restorative tea. Guests later testified that he praised its distinctive taste, remarking on its refreshing sweetness. Within 2 hours, however, he was doubled over with chest pains and gasping for air. Summoned once more, Dr. Peaton found the inspector lying peacefully in bed, his body marked by the same dilated pupils, the same almond-like scent, and the same inexplicable scattering of pink oleander petals. In April, respected land surveyor Edgar Beaumont suffered the same fate. His work mapping plantation boundaries had made him indispensable to Charleston's wealthiest families, but even his prominence did not prompt officials to question the familiar pattern. Instead, his death, like the others, was written off as a cruel coincidence. By May, the killings had grown both bolder and more frequent. Within a single week, rice planter James Rutledge of Georgetown and merchant Thomas Bellingham of Columbia both perished after stopping at the Wayfarer house and drinking Lavinia's tea. Whispers began to spread through the Low Country of a curse upon the inn of restless spirits haunting the ground where travelers had died. Yet these rumors were tempered by the Fisher family's sterling reputation. Lavinia had woven herself deeply into Charleston society, not just as a hostess, but as a benefactor. She poured money into the Methodist Church, organized aid for families devastated by storms and illness, and hosted sewing circles that became the highlight of the local ladies' social calendar. During the hurricane of 1846, she had nursed neighbors through broken bones and fever. When yellow fever swept the region the following summer, she put herself in danger by tending to the sick, earning gratitude from families who credited her with saving their loved ones. Her intelligence and charm only amplified her appeal. She could discuss scripture, literature, and politics with equal ease, enchanting every room she entered. John Fisher, though less dazzling, commanded respect in his own right. Known for his quiet reliability and unmatched carpentry skills, he worked tirelessly to maintain his property and volunteered his labor for neighbors without ever accepting pay. His humility, coupled with his devotion to Lavinia, only deepened the community's admiration. Their marriage seemed the embodiment of harmony, with John gazing at his wife in open adoration, and Lavinia returning his affection with gentle tenderness. Together they projected an image so flawless, so deeply rooted in Christian virtue and civic generosity, that no one could have believed the growing trail of bodies led back to their door. The Fishers seemed to embody everything Southern society admired in a marriage: his steadfast devotion, her grace and loyalty, their union the perfect balance of protection and tenderness. While Charleston gossiped about their charm and generosity, Samuel Hartwell was following a trail of numbers and names that painted a much darker picture. His review of insurance records across 3 states revealed a chilling pattern. Many of the dead men had purchased their policies from the same elusive agent, a woman known as Laura Ferguson. According to her paperwork, Ferguson was a widow from Augusta, drawn into the insurance business after her husband's tragic death in a carriage accident. On paper, her record was dazzling. In less than 2 years, she had sold over $200,000 worth of coverage, an extraordinary achievement in an industry where most agents struggled to win a fraction of that. Her success rate bordered on the unbelievable chance encounters at taverns, coaching inns, and roadside stops, somehow turned into lucrative contracts with wealthy traveling businessmen. What stood out most was her uncanny ability to tailor policies perfectly to each client, recommending coverage that aligned precisely with their financial means, while ensuring maximum payouts. She knew details about their businesses, families, and travel schedules that should have required weeks of investigation. Yet she claimed this insight came naturally. Hartwell's suspicions sharpened when he gathered physical descriptions from surviving clients. Ferguson, they said, was strikingly beautiful, tall, with auburn hair, green eyes, and a voice like music. She was intelligent, charming, and gifted with an uncanny memory for personal details. Every account matched almost word for word the descriptions Hartwell had already heard of Lavinia Fisher. The pieces began to align, and the possibility that the Fishers' elegant innkeeper was also the region's most successful insurance agent could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. In early June, Hartwell's investigation turned urgent. Within a single week, 3 more men died under the same circumstances. Plantation overseer Daniel Thornton, cotton factor, Robert Sinclair, and tobacco merchant George Peaton. Each had been traveling alone. Each had purchased new life insurance from Laura Ferguson within the last 6 months. Each died suddenly after accepting refreshments prepared by innkeepers who seemed unusually attentive. And at each death scene lay the same haunting markers, oleander petals scattered near the body, and that unmistakable almond-like scent clinging to the victim's belongings. Unlike the earlier cases, these deaths revealed a sharper edge. All 3 men had been carrying significant sums of money and important business papers. By the time their bodies were found, both had vanished. Authorities dismissed the losses as opportunistic thefts committed after natural deaths. But to Hartwell, the pattern was undeniable. These were not chance robberies. They were part of a calculated system designed to extract both money and insurance payouts with chilling precision. The more Hartwell uncovered, the more he realized the brilliance of the scheme. Ferguson never approached her victims blindly. Thornton met her at an inn in Orangeburg where she displayed suspiciously detailed knowledge of plantation management. Sinclair encountered her at a Charleston coffeehouse, impressed by her grasp of cotton market trends. Peaton crossed paths with her at a tavern in Columbia, where she spoke fluently about tobacco curing and exports. In every encounter, she appeared as a woman of rare intelligence and sympathy, convincing these men that true responsibility lay in protecting their families from the dangers of travel with generous life insurance. By now, Hartwell was convinced the Fisher Outing household was no innocent inn but the headquarters of an organized murder ring. If he was to prove it, polite suspicion and quiet inquiries would not suffice. Only direct confrontation with the enterprise itself could bring the truth into the light. Hartwell knew the only way to bring down the Fishers was to step directly into their trap. He would need to visit the 6-mile Wayfarer house in person, posing as yet another prosperous traveler while secretly gathering evidence strong enough to secure arrest warrants. The plan was perilous. If his suspicions were correct, one wrong move could place him among the inn's growing list of silent victims. For several days, he worked meticulously on a false identity. He became Samuel Henderson, a cotton broker from Richmond, Virginia, hoping to expand his network among South Carolina planters. His cover story included a carefully crafted family background, financial standing, and recent life insurance purchases, all details designed to make him appear like the perfect target, wealthy, respectable, and vulnerable. On a humid Thursday afternoon in late June, Hartwell rode up to the 6-mile Wayfarer house. He had studied the patterns of the previous victims' arrivals and timed his entrance to match them. The sight that greeted him was even more impressive than the accounts he had read. The white columns gleamed in the fading light, and the manicured gardens released competing waves of floral perfume. The inn radiated wealth and refinement far beyond the means of an ordinary coaching stop, a prosperity that seemed as carefully cultivated as the flowers in its gardens. Lavinia Fisher greeted him at the entrance, and in that instant, Hartwell understood how so many accomplished men had been undone. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her presence that disarmed. She carried herself with such poise that every glance, every word felt like an intimate gift. Within minutes, Hartwell found himself subjected to a line of questioning so subtle and charming that most men would never realize they were being interrogated. She asked about his business, his family, his travels, all under the guise of idle curiosity. Yet her precision betrayed the truth she was probing, assessing, and cataloging. "You seem like a man who takes care of his responsibilities, Mr. Henderson," she said softly, her emerald eyes locking onto his. "I imagine you've made proper arrangements for your family's security should anything happen during your travels." When Hartwell, keeping to his role, casually mentioned recent increases to his life insurance coverage, her smile widened almost imperceptibly. He saw a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, the glint of a predator recognizing its prey. Moments later, she insisted on preparing a special tea, her grandmother's recipe, a restorative that weary travelers swore by. "I use flowers from my own garden," she said, gesturing to the blossoms visible through the parlor windows. "So many of our guests tell me my tea is unlike anything they've ever tasted." The words chilled him. Those guests, he realized, were likely buried in shallow graves, their voices forever silenced. While Lavinia busied herself in the kitchen, Hartwell used the opportunity to survey the inn with the eye of a man trained to notice what others overlooked. The opulence confirmed his suspicions. The polished hardwood floors were covered with Persian rugs of unmistakable value. Crystal chandeliers glittered above ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork. Gilded frames held oil portraits meant to suggest lineage and refinement, though they might easily have been purchased to create the illusion of aristocracy. In the dining room, a mahogany table long enough to seat a dozen men gleamed in the afternoon light, surrounded by silk-upholstered chairs worth more than a laborer's annual wage. Silver gleamed in cabinets stamped with the marks of Charleston's finest craftsmen. Every detail whispered the same truth: the Fisher's wealth was not born of hospitality. It was built on death. What struck Hartwell most was not the grandeur of the inn, but the telling details that betrayed its origin. The silverware was immaculate, untouched by the wear that heirlooms usually carried. The crystal glasses sparkled as though newly purchased, free of scratches or chips. The fine furniture bore none of the scuffs or stains expected in a busy roadside inn, where countless guests would normally leave behind the inevitable traces of careless use. These were not relics of family wealth. They were recent acquisitions, expensive ones, their presence suggesting a steady stream of income far beyond what the modest flow of travelers could explain. Combined with the suspicious deaths and insurance claims, the conclusion was obvious: the Fisher's prosperity was being built on murder. Hartwell's suspicions deepened when John Fisher entered the parlor, clutching ledgers and letters that he hastily gathered when he noticed the investigator's presence. His hands trembled slightly as he offered a thin smile. "Business correspondence," he explained, claiming that he kept careful records of supply arrangements with Charleston and Columbia merchants. His tone sounded rehearsed, his manner far sharper and more guarded than the humble, harmless innkeeper he pretended to be. In that moment, Hartwell saw through the mask. John Fisher was no simple caretaker. He was an accomplice alert, calculating and accustomed to deception. From the kitchen came the faint sound of humming a melody so beautiful and haunting that it made Hartwell's stomach tighten. It struck him that countless doomed travelers had likely heard the same song in their final hours. Moving to the doorway, he watched as Lavinia prepared his restorative tea. Gone was the glowing charm she had shown minutes earlier. Her face was transformed cold, focused, and clinical. She measured powders and leaves with the precision of a practiced apothecary, her movements deliberate and exact. This was not the casual hospitality of a hostess. It was the ritual of a poisoner, perfecting her craft. When she caught him watching, her mask returned instantly. Smiling sweetly, she carried the delicate china cup toward him. "Almost ready," she said with her usual lilt. "So many of our guests have told me this tea is unforgettable." The emphasis on that final word sent a chill through Hartwell's blood. He realized she was likely telling the truth. Her victims never forgot it, for it was the last thing they ever tasted. As she placed the saucer before him, Hartwell noticed the unsettling details. The tea shimmered with a faint pink hue, unlike any ordinary brew. Its aroma was overpowering, sweet floral, and heavy, almost narcotic in its intensity. Tiny fragments floated on the surface, unmistakably resembling oleander petals, the same deadly signature found at every death scene. Hartwell steadied his hand as he lifted the cup, acutely aware of Lavinia's gaze fixed upon him. Her eyes shone not with kindness, but with anticipation, a predator waiting for her prey to seal its own fate. The intoxicating fragrance of the tea rose around him, making his head swim. He knew with absolute certainty that the next move he made would decide everything, whether he would live to reveal the truth or vanish like the others into the silence of unmarked graves. Hartwell saw her for what she truly was, not a gracious hostess or charitable wife, but a predator who had honed murder into a performance using every element of Southern femininity as her disguise. Her beauty, her charm, her acts of kindness, her church-going reputation, all were weapons carefully wielded to disarm and ensnare. In that moment, he realized her entire life was an act designed to make men believe they were safe in her care, when in truth they were already marked for death. As the poisoned tea reached his lips, Hartwell feigned a clumsy stumble, deliberately spilling the contents across the expensive Persian rug. The liquid spread quickly, filling the room with its cloying, sickly sweet aroma. For the briefest instant, Lavinia's mask slipped. A flash of unfiltered rage twisted her perfect features into something monstrous, her green eyes blazing with a fury that seemed almost inhuman. Then just as quickly she smoothed her expression back into a smile, though her composure was brittle, her voice tight as she said, "How unfortunate. I'm so sorry you've missed the opportunity to enjoy grandmother's special recipe. Perhaps you're more tired than you realized. I'll prepare another cup at once." Hartwell forced an embarrassed laugh, playing his role with care. "Please don't trouble yourself. I fear I'm more exhausted than I thought. Best I rest before taking any refreshments. A nap might do me more good than tea." He could see the calculation in her eyes as she studied him, weighing whether to press the matter. Then, as she knelt to clean the spilled liquid, the truth became undeniable. Against the dark threads of the Persian rug, several pink oleander petals floated, their edges softened by the pooling tea. The aroma rising from the spill was identical to the scent that had clung to every dead man's body Hartwell had examined. And before he could fully process what he had just confirmed, John Fisher appeared in the doorway. This was no longer the quiet, unassuming innkeeper Hartwell had first met. John's posture was taut alert, his gaze flicking between Hartwell and his wife with the precision of a man accustomed to silent signals and practiced routines. "Is everything all right, my dear?" calm but edged with menace. It wasn't a question. It was a cue. Our guest is simply tired from his travels. Lavinia replied smoothly, stepping subtly between Hartwell and the door. I think he would benefit from immediate rest, rather than waiting until later this evening. The coded exchange left no doubt in Hartwell's mind. They were already planning how to deal with him. That night barricaded in the room they had given him. Hartwell lay in the dark, every nerve taut, straining to catch the sounds of the house around him. From below came whispers that carried easily through the old floorboards. Lavinia's voice had shed its mask, entirely stripped of music and grace. Cold and venomous, it cut through the stillness. The investigator suspects something. Hartwell's blood ran cold. How can you be sure John's voice was tight, uncertain? Maybe he just spilled the tea. Plenty of guests are clumsy after long rides. Don't be naive. Lavinia snapped, her tone seething with contempt. No one spills tea that carefully unless they mean to avoid drinking it. He was watching me, studying every movement, as though he knew what I was doing. Someone has connected the deaths to us. Hartwell's fears were confirmed in that moment. Not only was he trapped in the home of killers, but they now knew he was more than just another weary traveler. If he didn't find a way out by morning, he would never leave the 6-mile wayfarer house alive. Through the cracked shutters of his upstairs window, Hartwell watched John Fisher moving across the moonlit grounds, a heavy canvas bundle slung over his shoulder. The man's gait was steady and deliberate, betraying the ease of someone long accustomed to the grim task he was performing. He disappeared into the swampy darkness of Goose Creek, slipping between the moss-draped trees along well-worn paths that would leave no trace for investigators. The sight chilled Hartwell. He was almost certainly witnessing the disposal of incriminating evidence, perhaps clothing personal effects, or even the remains of previous victims. The swamp with its hungry alligators offered a perfect graveyard, one from which nothing would ever return. As midnight approached, the voices downstairs grew clearer, Lavinia's cold and commanding tone carrying easily through the floorboards. What Hartwell heard confirmed his darkest fears. This was not the work of desperate innkeepers improvising crimes of opportunity. It was a calculated enterprise honed over years of practice. The Savannah contact says new identities can be arranged. Lavinia was explaining, but the cost will be substantial. We'll need $15,000 at least to disappear completely and start over with proper papers. John's voice, quieter and tremulous, betrayed both fear and fatigue. How many more will that take? That depends on what they're carrying and the value of their policies, she replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing harvest yields. The cotton broker expected next week should bring $3,000 between his cash and insurance. The rice planter after him could be worth twice that if the rumors about his habits are true. And the bodies, John asked, his voice tightening. Lavinia laughed softly, a sound that froze Hartwell more than her earlier rage had. The alligators have been remarkably cooperative. By the time anyone even thinks to search the swamp, if they ever do, there will be nothing left to identify. The conversation went on for nearly an hour, and with each word, the scale of their scheme became clearer. The Fishers were not acting alone. They were tied to a network that stretched across the South. Savannah contacts forged false identities. Associates in Charleston identified wealthy travelers. Informants in Columbia tracked routes and schedules. Lavinia herself played a dual role as Laura Ferguson, the insurance agent who sold lucrative policies, and as the innkeeper who welcomed those same men into her home. She perfected her poison oleander extract, so its symptoms resembled natural heart failure, its sweet flavor masking any bitterness that might betray it. With victims dead, the Fishers stripped them of valuables, money, and documents, then consigned their bodies to Goose Creek, where nature swiftly erased every trace. As dawn neared, Hartwell heard John return his boots heavy on the porch boards, his clothes damp with swamp mud. The sound of water carried through the walls as as he scrubbed himself clean, preparing to resume the role of the humble, devoted innkeeper. By then, Hartwell had spent hours scribbling detailed notes, recording every word he overheard, every observation he had made since his arrival. He now had proof of multiple murders, systematic insurance fraud, the disposal site of bodies, and the identities of those responsible, as well as the outlines of a wider criminal conspiracy. But documentation was meaningless if he didn't survive to deliver it. The Fishers suspected him already. He knew with certainty that they would never let him leave alive if they believed he was investigating them. His only advantage was that they still seemed intent on preserving their established method. They wanted him to drink the tea, to die like the others, and to be remembered as just another unlucky traveler struck down by the low country's unforgiving climate. That hesitation might be the sliver of time he needed to escape. Hartwell's escape from the 6-mile Wayfarer house was as much an act of calculated nerve as it was luck. At dawn, he informed the Fishers, still under the guise of Samuel Henderson, that urgent business matters demanded his immediate return to Charleston. He apologized for cutting his stay short, claiming he had received word of problems that required his personal attention. Lavinia's disappointment was delivered with her usual charm, but her eyes betrayed her. There was a predatory sharpness there, as though she were already calculating how to reclaim control of her would-be victim. "I do hope you'll return soon, Mr. Henderson," she said with a smile that looked more like the bared teeth of a wolf than the warmth of a hostess. "It would be such a shame if our paths never crossed again. I'm certain we'll meet again." Hartwell replied evenly, though in his mind he resolved that their next encounter would be across the courtroom floor. On July 3, 1847, the arrests of John and Lavinia Fisher shocked Charleston society and sent ripples of fear and fascination across the South. The glamorous innkeepers, once celebrated for their charity and refinement, were unmasked as cold-blooded predators. Hartwell's testimony, paired with a sweeping search of the Wayfarer house and its surrounding swamp, revealed a scale of horror no one had imagined. Beneath the kitchen floor, investigators discovered a hidden compartment stuffed with ledgers and records. Inside were detailed notes on 23 murders committed over nearly 3 years. Each entry contained chillingly precise information: the victim's financial circumstances, travel routes, insurance coverage, and the exact method of their death. Even more disturbing were Lavinia's clinical notes: experiments with poison dosages, observations on symptoms, refinements to her mixtures. Murder to her had been both science and art. Other evidence drove the truth home: jewelry, watches, signet rings, and other valuables stolen from victims filled boxes and trunks, alongside more than $12,000 in hidden cash. Goose Creek Swamp yielded grim confirmation. Though alligators had consumed much, investigators recovered bones, clothing scraps, and personal effects enough to prove the systematic disposal of human lives into the waters. The greatest revelation was Lavinia's laboratory. Tucked away in the house, it contained plants cultivated for their toxins, glass vessels, extraction equipment, and a library of reference texts. Oleander foxglove and castor beans were among her specimens. Her journals revealed months of experimentation, testing combinations and dosages to achieve deaths that looked natural, but were certain and swift. She had perfected oleander extracts for their sweet taste and ability to mimic fatal heart failure, a poison as elegant as it was deadly. Under interrogation, the full extent of their network emerged. The Fishers, or rather the Sorrells, their true surname, were not isolated murderers, but part of a larger criminal machine stretching across the Southeast. Their associates arranged false identities, laundered stolen wealth, and supplied intelligence on wealthy travelers. Charleston contacts helped select targets. Savannah connections forged documents. Columbia informants tracked routes. The 6-mile Wayfarer house had been only one of several murder sites. Lavinia herself had lived a double life as the insurance agent Laura Ferguson. charming men into policies that would later enrich the organization. Her combination of beauty, intelligence, and calculated ruthlessness made her one of the most effective predators of her age. And behind the illusion of Southern refinement, the Fisher couple had been revealed as something far darker. Career criminals from New Orleans who had come to South Carolina, not for opportunity, but for slaughter. The revelation shattered Charleston's image of genteel hospitality. The inn that once promised rest for weary travelers became a symbol of deception, greed, and betrayal. A reminder that even the warmest welcome could conceal death waiting with a smile. Before they became Charleston's most notorious innkeepers, John and Lavinia Sorrells had lived lives steeped in deception. John had cut his teeth on riverboat gambling schemes along the Mississippi, perfecting the art of cheating desperate men out of their fortunes. While Lavinia worked as a confidence artist preying on wealthy suitors, she charmed, seduced, and then robbed. Their reinvention as respectable innkeepers was no accident. It was the culmination of years of calculated planning. They studied Charleston's elite, imitated aristocratic mannerisms and speech, and built backstories convincing enough to withstand casual scrutiny. Their charity, their piety, their apparent generosity were all investments carefully designed to shield their true enterprise. When their crimes were finally exposed, the ensuing trial became one of the most sensational in South Carolina's history. Courtrooms were packed with spectators, eager to catch a glimpse of the beautiful woman who had turned Southern hospitality into a weapon of mass murder. Newspapers printed lurid accounts painting Lavinia as both monstrous and mesmerizing. Throughout the proceedings, she remained composed, sometimes smiling, sometimes openly flirting with prosecutors and jurors, as though charm alone might sway her fate. Many remarked that she seemed to relish the attention, her beauty undimmed by chains or scandal. Her final statement before sentencing stripped away any illusion of remorse. "Men are such predictable fools," she said coldly, "when it comes to a beautiful woman offering kindness and attention. They never suspect the hand serving them tea with a smile might be the same hand measuring poison with scientific precision. We simply took advantage of their weakness and society's stupid assumptions about feminine virtue." On August 18th, 1847, John Sorrells was hanged defiant and loyal to the end, refusing to reveal the names of their accomplices. 2 days later, Lavinia followed, becoming one of the first women executed in South Carolina. Crowds gathered in numbers rarely seen, eager to witness the death of a woman who had weaponized beauty itself. Even at the gallows, she remained unrepentant, her last words echoing in stunned silence. "I regret nothing except that we didn't have time to perfect our methods further." If society insists on treating women as helpless ornaments, it should not be surprised when some of us use those expectations as weapons. After their executions, the 6-mile Wayfarer house was abandoned. Locals swore the building decayed with unnatural speed, collapsing into ruin within 2 years, as though the evil it had sheltered had poisoned its very foundation. For decades, the land remained untouched, haunted by whispers of travelers who never reached their destinations. Samuel Hartwell's investigation not only ended the Sorrells' reign of terror, but transformed the insurance industry across the Southeast. Companies began coordinating with one another, tightening background checks on agents, and systematically reviewing suspicious claims. His meticulous records became a model for modern investigation, studied for generations by law enforcement and insurers alike. In the years that followed, his intelligence led to arrests across Georgia, Alabama, and Louisiana, slowly unraveling the larger criminal network the Sorrells had served. Yet in Charleston's memory, it was not the reforms or the investigations that lingered. It was the chilling reminder that beneath the silken gowns and honeyed words of Southern gentility could lurk something far more dangerous than bandits in the woods, a hostess offering poison with a smile. Some members of the Sorrells' wider network escaped justice, vanishing into frontier territories where law enforcement was thin and record-keeping almost non-existent. It is likely that similar schemes continued in other regions, preying on travelers in places where vigilance was weaker and communication between jurisdictions nearly impossible. The case established important legal precedents, treating the Fishers' crimes not as isolated acts of murder, but as part of an organized criminal enterprise. It forced courts and investigators to recognize that such conspiracies could span multiple states and demanded better cooperation across boundaries. The trial also exposed just how vulnerable travelers were in the mid-19th century. With no telegraphs along many routes, letters moving at a crawl, and insurance records scattered across separate offices, criminals could operate undetected for years. Men who thought they were securing their families' futures through life insurance policies instead became targets. Their deaths explained away as accidents of climate or exhaustion. Years later, Hartwell often admitted that he had narrowly escaped becoming one more name in Lavinia's ledger. A single sip of her poisoned tea might have ended him, his death recorded as heart failure, his evidence lost, and the Sorrells enterprise continuing unchecked. That brush with death haunted him, sharpening his belief that vigilance and skepticism were the investigators' most vital weapons. The case of Lavinia Sorrells endures as one of the most chilling examples of how society's ideals can be twisted into tools of destruction. She wielded beauty, piety, and hospitality as weapons, turning the very symbols of feminine virtue into the camouflage of a predator. At least 23 lives were confirmed lost, but the true number may never be known. It is entirely possible that victims outside Charleston were erased so cleanly from the record that no suspicion ever arose. So, what do you think? Was the full scope of the Sorrells criminal network ever revealed, or did accomplices slip away to continue the same methods elsewhere? Were there more victims whose deaths were simply filed away as chance tragedies of travel? Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your theories. And if this tale of deadly deception gripped you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this story with friends who love exploring the darkest corners of American history. The past still casts long shadows, and together we'll step into them to uncover the secrets time has tried to bury.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.